Well, hello and welcome to this edition of Right for New Hampshire. My name is Ray Chadwick. I'm your host today. I'm chairman of the Granite State Taxpayers, the state's oldest statewide taxpayer advocacy group. We're believers, in our founders' words, low taxes are the result of low spending. So we're always happy to talk about tax reform, more effective use of government money, and keeping government to its constitutional means and needs. So today we're fortunate to have a internationally acclaimed taxpayer advocate. His name is Grover Norquist. Grover, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely, Ray. Thank you for having me.
Hey, it's great to have you in New Hampshire as always, and thank you for spending some time here. So you're president of Americans for Tax Reform. Tell me about that organization. How'd you start it? What do you do? What are the belief structures?
Sure. Americans for Tax Reform was created in 1985. The Reagan White House wanted an outside group to campaign for what became the Tax Reform Act of 1986. That's when we took tax rates down, broadened the base. It was designed to be roughly revenue neutral. It was actually a small tax cut, but the goal was not a tax cut, but to reduce marginal tax rates and eliminate a lot of deductions and credits that were political favoritism, not something that helped grow the economy. So I took that job on. We fought hard to get the tax reform package enacted, which it was. It was actually bipartisan. There were two rates, 15% and 28%. Give you some idea of the level of consensus that low marginal tax rates, the corporate rate went to 34%, the individual down from 50, the individual rate down from 50 to 28% and 15, two rates there. It was very pro-growth, very helpful. And unfortunately, George Herbert Walker Bush got elected president after Reagan and didn't understand what Reagan had accomplished in 8 years and proceeded to raise marginal tax rates. But then when he lost the next election, that's when the Republican Party made a choice. We're not with Bush, we're with Reagan. We're the party of low rates, not funding the modern Democratic Party's spending spree.
Yeah, and just so our viewers understand that, marginal tax rate is basically what do you pay in taxes and percentage on the next dollar of income you have. So the reason that's important in the old days, we're talking about that pre-Reagan's tax cuts, you might be paying 60 or 70% depending on your income and the rest. So now the question is, okay, how much harder do I want to work? How many days do I want to work overtime when every dollar I earn, 60 cents goes to the government? So the consequence, when you reduce the amount of money taken out of someone's pocket, you incentivize them to work harder or invest the money that they now have. And that's what grows the economy and makes things all work well.
Yeah, the marginal tax rate is how do you tax the most recent dollar that you earn? It doesn't really matter how much you pay on the first dollar you earn. It's the last dollar you earn, the decision you make, work on Saturday or not. Yep. Prior to Reagan's tax cuts, top rate was 70%. So you could earn an extra $100 to work a Saturday. You only got to keep $30. And so the cost of taking a day off was not $100. It's a $100 cost to the economy, but it's a $30 cost to you. And so many people would say, I will, people joked about doctors golfing a lot because their incomes were so high, their taxes were so high. Why not take Wednesday off and golf? It's very inexpensive. At the end of the Reagan years, the top rate was 28, not 70, 28. So to take Saturday off, if you're going to be paid $100, you got to keep $72. The government would take 28, you'd keep 72. So the reward to working was not $30, but $72, which means the incentive to go work, save, invest on margin is higher. And to decide not to save, work, or invest, or to take the day off, it raised the cost of leisure more than twice. So it made it more expensive to take time off or not invest.
Yeah, and this is the fundamental reason why people like we, and a lot of people, in my opinion, common sense, recognize that the less money the government takes out of your pocket to fulfill certain needs, I got it, government has needs, or responsibilities more accurately, but what that does is incentivizes people to grow the economy, to take the money that they now are no longer giving back to the government and hire more people, buy more things that hire more people to make them, et cetera, et cetera. This isn't new and novel either. If I remember, John F. Kennedy signed legislation that dropped tax rates, and he was the one, I think, coined the phrase that, rising tide lifts all boats. So he didn't get into this, oh my God, it only benefits the rich. Certainly it benefits the rich, but it also benefits anyone who pays taxes.
Yeah. John F. Kennedy, in explaining his tax cut, was an explicitly supply-side argument, very much like Reagan's.
Right.
Democrats hated that, but by 1980, the Democrats would have hated John F. Kennedy. He was an anti-communist. He was religious. He believed in economic growth. They hated John F. Kennedy. So he really, really made the case for reducing marginal tax rates to create more incentives to invest and save and work.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think let's go back to the tax cuts in 2017, the Tax Cuts Jobs Act, which President Trump signed, I think, on Christmas Day, if I remember. And that did much of the same thing. But in addition, it had a couple really significant things in the corporate tax rates. Why don't you comment on that? Because I want to make sure everyone understands how well that worked.
Yeah, during the last 20, 30 years, there have been a lot of debates on the individual rate, but the corporate rate in the United States was 35%, which at the time, back in 1986, made us one of the lower corporate rate taxes. Mm-hmm. But other countries looked and saw how our tax cuts helped the economy, and that reducing the corporate rate didn't lose revenue, it gained revenue because more people worked, more people created more wealth, and there were more businesses. So all around the world, everybody was taking their corporate rates down to where by the time that Trump was elected president, the highest business tax, the highest corporate tax in the world was the United States at 35. The European average was in the low 20s. Communist China was at 25%, 10% lower than America's tax on business. And Ireland is at 12.5%, Hungary is at 9%. We were stuck at 35. So the president correctly said, if you take 35, he wanted to take it to 15, which I think would have been a good idea. We got it down to 21, and you saw investment from all over the world flow to the United States because we were now a low tax country to invest in. And money that people held overseas, they brought back to the United States. Trillions of dollars is very, very helpful.
Yeah, and that's exactly what he set out to do, said he would do. And Trump has made a big point about how jobs flowed out of this country, primarily to China, but other places too, over the years. And I'm not sure most people really anticipate how much the corporate tax rate affected that. So the corporations act the same way as people. You will buy things that, or invest in things that give you the most benefit, i.e. the most money remaining in your pocket. So if you can do that in Hong Kong or someplace else, then that's what they did, and they did it for quite some time.
Yeah. Keep in mind that China learned also about supply-side economics under Deng, who was the early reformer. He was a communist, but he was a reformer. What they used to do with the peasants was basically, we want you to grow this much grain, and after that we have 100% tax on everything you earn. So if you could imagine, people grew this much grain and then really didn't spend a lot of time doing something that was 100% tax. They took that 100% and said, tell you what, we'll take a certain amount total, and then after that, it's 25% for us, 75% for you. So they took the marginal tax rate from $100 down, from 100% down to 25%. And that was the boom that was the China free market liberalization. It was a supply side tax cut. And the Chinese brought more people out of poverty than anybody in history in a wonderfully short period of time. Of course, they were coming from such an awful socialist, communist high taxes, but they took it down dramatically, and you saw anywhere in the world, supply side economics, lower marginal tax rates works.
Yeah, I think this goes back to fundamental human nature. People have a desire of maximizing their self-interest, and that generally means having more assets. You want to work, you want to earn money, do it do whatever you do. And then you want the fruits of your labor to be able to be something you decide what to do. And you can do it on charity, you can do it whatever you want. But I think universally people have less interest in giving it over to government entities, which will then take the fruits of your labor and invest them on whatever they want. And often that's not quite the same things you want.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, but the tax cuts that Trump and the Republicans passed, both for individuals, they doubled the per child tax credit. They took the bottom 10% rate down to 0 and brought one rate down to 15, so that we have a series of lower rates, and they cut marginal tax rates for every single American.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated with people who will tell you, well, we'll give you a tax cut, Mr. and Ms. Taxpayer. We got to find a way to offset that or justify that or pay for it. And it always impresses me when I hear someone saying that. They actually believe it's their money. So if I leave more of it in, it's my money, okay, and I leave it in your hands, you got to find a way to make it right for me. And every time I do that, my head explodes. You know?
Well, people on the left say things like, the Republicans gave people a tax cut.
No.
So, you know, if you're walking down the street and a mugger walks past you on the other side of the street and doesn't steal your wallet, that reason is that the mugger gave you your wallet. If the government doesn't take your income, it gave you that income. Well, what does that mean? That means everything we do is owned by the government. I mean, that's a rather extreme form of National Socialism or Soviet socialism or some bizarre government control. Everything belongs to the government. You know, everything's the king's except what he doles out to you. That's kind of how feudalism worked, but that's not what we live in. That's not America. That's not us. And in point of fact, the Constitution says that the government has to make a case for why they take anything, and they can only tax you to do those things listed in the Constitution. We have over time got the government in a lot of things that have nothing to do with the Constitution and are not constitutional, and therefore to tax people for it is not legal. So we need to get government down to doing what it should do, what it's allowed to do by the Constitution, and then after that, keep taxes down as well.
Yeah, and the keeping taxes down is just a way to give them less money to waste on things. I want to go back for a second because every time I think of this, I remember back what I've read, of course, of the founding of the country. The founders were all believers in a political philosopher named John Locke. John Locke had pretty much all of the ideas that wound up in the Constitution. And if you go to Jefferson's mansion, Thomas Jefferson's, there's actually a bust of John Locke there in his library. But Locke had a very interesting commentary on property. And the competing philosophy was Thomas Hobbes. And Hobbes, his belief was that property was, you retained your property as long as you could retain it, if you could control it and protect it. And if somebody came along who was stronger than you, they could take control of it. Now it was their property, the mugger analysis you used. But Locke had a different flaw. He said, your property is yours for other reasons. It's yours because you invested the time and effort to earn the money to buy it. It's yours because of your efforts. And when I think about this, give me more of your money in taxes, I come back to the same thing. No, it's my money. And somebody saying, I'm going to take it, you got to convince me why you should keep it, is channeling Thomas Hobbes and the kings of old.
No, absolutely. Locke and look, the United States was founded on property rights. About 2/3 of Americans, colonists, owned land. All you had to do was keep walking west, and there was land that was available. And so people who wanted to were able to own land and be in charge of their own lives, raise their own food and so on. So that level of the dispersal of ownership of land, of property, made the propertied republic of the United States one where people had both the vote, but also control of their own part of the economy. And it's why we grew faster. We had lower taxes. We were taxed at 1% to 2%. of our income when we were colonists back in 1774. Europe, London was paying 20% of its income taxes to the British government. We were paying 1 to 2% in taxes. We were low tax. We had property rights that people respected and defended. And we were open to anybody from Europe who wanted to come. And so it was a very open society. And it grew and it grew and it grew to where we became the richest country in the world, even though we were technically a backwater colony when we started.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because back in the day when I used to do a lot more international business, and occasionally people would ask me, well, Americans don't seem to bother much about what's going on in, you know, Canadian politics or here, there, and everywhere. And I had a lot of Canadian friends, they'd say that. And I said, well, you know, it's not that we don't care, but if you go into the fabric of the country, we used to live in Virginia and up in Jamestown, first surviving English settlement, they have replicas of the 3 boats these people came into, and they would fit inside the average house with 60 people on each of them. And I took some of these visitors there one time, folks from Japan. I said, those people sailed across the North Atlantic in the wintertime in those boats. That is a group of people that wanted to get away and be left alone to do whatever they wanted. And that's the culture.
Yeah, and it helped that you did have people escaping religious persecution, economic failure, famine, being drafted into wars of different kings. People were trying to get away from abusive government, so they were unlikely to try and reattach that here in the States.
Yeah, and I think the issue and why this, what you're doing, what we're doing here makes sense is because when I look at government, because government it's grown like Topsy over the years, and it tends to aggregate a lot of money in one place, and there's always groups or individuals who have interest in certain projects. And so they gravitate towards influencing the legislature or bureaucracy to try and give them a bit of money. And the average individual doesn't have a special interest, you know, they pay their taxes. So we need to have people that watch out for the interests of the taxpayers.
Yeah, well, that's what Americans for Tax Reform works to do. In order to do that, we created the Taxpayer Protection Pledge. That's
about that.
shared with congressmen and senators in 1986. So 100 congressmen signed the pledge and 20 senators signed the pledge, never to raise taxes, to oppose and vote against any effort to raise taxes. Reagan endorsed the pledge as well. And now we have about 90% of all the Republicans in the House and Senate have signed the pledge, never to raise taxes. And the point where we hit, you know, 95% of everybody in the Republican Party signing the pledge was in 1994 in that election, because people have seen when George Herbert Walker Bush raised taxes after Reagan, he was thrown out of office. He had a fairly successful presidency, except for the tax increase. He had said he raised taxes and he lied. And so people reacted both to his lying his way into office, pretending to be Reagan, pretending to never to raise taxes, and then raising taxes. And then spending went up as a result of his tax increase too. It was not some deal to raise taxes, cut spending. That's not at all what happened. It's what they said would happen, but he was tricked, lied to by the Democratic Party. And so you then had a Republican Party which almost to a man said, we are never raising taxes. And since that point in 94, the Republicans have won control of the House and Senate 2 out of 3 elections, whereas before 1994, for the 62 years before that, there were only 4 years of 62 years between 1932 and 1994, 4 years where the Republicans had the House and the Senate, 2 years under Truman, 2 years under Eisenhower. The Democrats controlled Congress almost the entire time. For 62, they didn't control either the House or the Senate. And the American people signaled that as the party that won't raise taxes, Republicans were able to win 2 out of 3 elections where they would control the House and the Senate. And that has really changed the nature of the modern Republican Party when Ronald Reagan and the Taxpayer Protection Pledge made it the party that would not raise your taxes. Then and only then did they be able to expect to win a majority in the House and the Senate more than half the time, 2/3 of the time.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. You know, it's interesting if you go back into the 30s and the 60s. One of the other issues, you get the trifecta of one party controls House, Senate, and the executive, and those are where the biggest spending bonanzas happened, and they're still plaguing us today. Why don't you comment on that? The Great Society and the New Deal.
Yeah, people often ask, you know, how do we get such a big government? We started with 1 to 2% of the economy being eaten up by government. Now it's almost 1/3. How did that happen? When did we agree to that? Did somebody amend the Constitution? And the answer is, every time there's a war, the government spends a bunch of money for the war, then it comes down, but never back all the way to where it was before. That money that went into build a military then gets siphoned off into other government programs. So that's one problem. But the other is there were two-year periods where half of the federal government was created. The first 2-year period was after the election in November 1934. So in the year of 1935 and 1936, Social Security, other programs were created. Then fast forwarding 30 years to the New Deal, you also had in the 64 election, a supermajority of Democrats won with Johnson, and that's when you got Medicaid, government, all sorts of government programs on food stamps and whatnot. So in the 2 years after the 64 election and the 2 years after the 34 election, government grew, new programs were created, and today, if you look at the budget, half the federal budget, more than 50% of the federal budget, was enacted and put into place in that 4 years, the two years. It's in 4 years. So it's not that the American people said, let's have a little more government. They said, that is good. Let's do a little bit more. That is good. Let's do a little bit more. That's good. The Democrats came in the wake of a crisis, decided to spend a bunch of money, and then in both cases got whacked in the next election. This was not people going, yay, big government, reward these people. That's what we wanted. They got whacked in the next elections as a result of that behavior. And then lost the presidency after Johnson because of all that crazy spending and so on. So if you look at the span of modern American history, it's one where the party that decided it wouldn't raise your taxes and would oppose overspending finally put that in writing and made it a policy of the party. That was a big deal. Very, very important. And it made the Republican Party the natural governing party in Congress, whereas before the Democrats were the undisputed 62-year champs. But also watch out, whenever one party gets a supermajority, they can do a lot of damage before they get thrown out again. And that's where the Democrats shoved big government down American throats in 35, 36, 65, 66. And then they planted seeds, entitlement programs, which just grow endlessly without being voted on. There's no vote to continue or reestablish Medicaid or food stamps or aid to families with dependent children. These just go on and on and on. The only way to ultimately get spending down is to block grant all the welfare programs, the food stamps and Medicaid and those programs that go to people because they're poor, not because they paid into it, like an insurance program, and block grant them and then limit them to the growth of the American economy or the wage increases for the American people. This is what we did with welfare under Clinton. It was the one thing Clinton did. He vetoed the first 2 times, signed it the last time. So that's a huge, huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, that's
get that ready, but we need to do this for all the other programs now.
Yeah, putting it back in the hands of the states makes it more efficient, more easy to see. Building the economy is the way to get, frankly, more revenue to the government, because, you know, more people working, even at lower tax rates, will give more tax revenue. And that's sort of the way out of some of these crises that have been building up for years. So, hey, you know, time is flying by here. You know, we only got about another 1 or 2 minutes. So what do you think's going on in the economy right now? We got COVID. It's sort of made a train wreck of things. We're going to get out of this soon.
Well, here's the good news. Both the death rates have been going down for quite some time and new cases. So it appears that it's moving towards where it's in the rearview mirror. We've now learned that it really affects older people most. Governor Cuomo, who took sick people and put them in the old folks' home, and thousands of people unnecessarily passed away. More than 40% of all deaths have been in nursing homes. So we need to quarantine the nursing homes, not the American economy, as we grow the economy. And there are vaccines coming. Quite a number of different vaccines are getting ready. They're making hundreds of millions of doses for that, so that as soon as the government says it's okay, they'll be made available to people. On the economy, the stock market, which is a measure of people's investments in the economy and how optimistic they are, when Trump got elected, it grew. Your 401k, your IRA, your life savings increased by 50%. If you had $10,000 in a 401k or IRA, it went to $15,000 as a result of the tax cuts and the less regulation. Then COVID brought it back down again, but never as low as it was when Obama was in charge of it. And then it's back up again to where you have 50% more in your life savings than you did the day Trump got elected. So it's back up again. I think people focus on that and say, if Biden wins, every one of his proposals will make your 401k, your IRA smaller, your life savings smaller. And Trump's ideas are to continue those things that have made it grow so that your retirement life savings are bigger, not smaller, that will win the election for Trump on the economic issue of who will help you be able to save for your retirement, who will create jobs, who will raise wages.
Sort of a who's watching out for you kind of thing.
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you what, Grover, it's been great having you here. Thank you for spending some of your time today. It's always great to hear from a Harvard-trained economist with an MBA and a tax fighter. Superb. So I'll let you go. Thank you for spending time with our viewers. If you have any questions, take a look at this video. Go to www.atr.org, the American Taxpayer Reform, and taxpayers.org. So thank you for watching us today, Grover. Thank you for being with us, and have a good day.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you.